So an issue a lot of new players that start out with TFT run into is that they don't really understand the difference between magic and physical abilities and how it interacts with critical strikes. And since we have set 7 coming up pretty soon, I thought it was a good time to make a video about this and explain the difference between the two. But even if you consider yourself a TFT veteran and you don't really want to go over all of those basics, I would still suggest that you stick around because there might be 1 or 2 interactions that you might not have known about. Now we're going to start with something very simple, which is that every single unit in the game has the same 25% base critical strike chance, which pretty much applies to all of their auto attacks. So for example, this Ezreal, you can more or less expect 1 out of 4 auto attacks to be a critical hit because of the 25%. But Ezreal also has a physical ability, the Mystic Shot. So he fires a missile at his target, dealing 93, 172, etc. physical damage, and if it hits, he will also gain attack speed steroid. Now those 25% base critical strike chance will not only apply to his auto attacks, but also to his physical ability. This means that if you give him an item like Infinity Edge, which boosts his critical strike chance to 100%, not only will every single one of his auto attacks be a critical hit, it is the same for his Mystic Shot, because the base critical strike chance will apply to auto attacks and physical abilities. Now the reason I bring this up, because a lot of people have a misunderstanding about physical abilities, especially regarding assassins. Now the way assassins work is, for example, here we have a Nocturne, and Nocturne has a magic ability, right? Like he fears his target dealing magic damage. And if you would only play this Nocturne and you don't have the assassin trait activated, then his ability would not be able to crit, even if you give him something like an Infinity Edge. The Infinity Edge would only apply to his auto attacks. So for example, if you add something like a Twitch and then you activate the assassin trait, this will now allow Nocturne's ability to crit, so he receives spell crit. And the way spell crit works is that it takes the same crit chance as with the auto attacks and the physical abilities. So that means if you give an assassin that has an AP ability, an Infinity Edge, and you have the assassin trait activated, then it's pretty much the same thing as if this Nocturne would have an Infinity Edge and a Jeweled Gauntlet without the assassin trait. Now the reason I bring this up is because of Khazix for the most part. See, the thing is, like, what you can do is, if you play 5 mutants, is that, maybe you want to add Arcanist or Scholar or whatever, you don't want to run Assassins. And the thing is, you don't need to. Khazix's ability is physical, which means is that if you run Assassins, this will not cause his ability to be able to crit. His ability is already able to crit in the first place, meaning that the only difference that you receive if you add a Nocturne together with a Khazix is that you slightly increase the critical strike chance and the critical strike damage, but it's not always worth it to do this, because a lot of the time the assassin will be a dead unit and you're probably better off running something else. Now for magic damage, it works a little bit different. If Brand ends up firing a fireball, then it will only deal the amount of magic damage that the ability shows. And if you want Brand to be able to crit, then there's a few ways you can do this. There's an augment called the Jeweled Lotus. This augment allows that magic and true damage from your unit's abilities can critically strike, and all of your units gain 25% critical strike chance. Now the most common way to get spellcasters to crit is to give them the item Jeweled Gauntlet, which builds out of a large rod and a sparring gloves. And this is usually favored in combination with Infinity Edge, which now boosts the critical strike chance to 100%. And this means that every single spellcast from Brand will be a critical hit, heavily increasing his damage. There's also a third way of making them crit, which is making a spellcaster into an assassin and activating the assassin trait. And since we're already talking about critical stuff, I might as well throw in the Last Whisper. So the thing about Last Whisper on Brand, for example, is that he would only be able to apply the Last Whisper effect if he crits with his auto attacks. But it is possible for something like Last Whisper to be applied with a Jeweled Gauntlet and a spell crit. See, the thing about Last Whisper is that the only thing this item cares about is that you inflict a critical hit. It doesn't specify that it needs to be physical, or it doesn't specify that it needs to be an auto attack. That means, for example, that if you would have, just theoretically, but if you would have a Last Whisper, a Jeweled Gauntlet, and Infinity Edge, then every single fireball from Brand would end up causing a Last Whisper proc, because it will always count as a critical hit. And please keep in mind that even if your opponent does have a Bramble Vest, then this doesn't really change anything, because the only thing Bramble does is it negates a part of the damage of the critical strike. It doesn't prevent the critical strike from occurring in the first place. So something like Last Whisper will still proc against the Bramble Vest and reduce the armor, even if it's from a spellcast or an auto attack. But yeah, that was pretty much it for me. I hope you learned something, and see you the next time.